Welcome to The Landscape by George Smith Partners.
Welcome to The Landscape. This is George Smith Partners podcast. I'm Evan Kinne, CEO of Access Capital, the parent company to George Smith Partners. Today, we're joined by a special guest. Justin Piasecki is co-hosting the podcast today. Justin is the president of George Smith Partners, sitting in our New York office. Welcome, Justin.
Thank you, Evan.
Yeah, and today we have a very special guest. He's a living legend in the commercial real estate intermediary business because, you know, this business is all about hustle. And there's no shortage of that from Mr. Bob Knakal. We're very glad to have him on the podcast today, and we were excited to ask him some questions, see how, you know, his career has shifted and turned over time, and what through lines and threads he can pull for us today, what's relevant today as it was 10 years ago, 20 years ago, et cetera. So very excited to have Bob on today, and thank you for joining us.
Sure thing, Evan. Thank you so much for having me on. And Justin, great to see you, and looking forward to the conversation.
So before we dive into it, Bob, why don't you give our listeners just like the real high level background? You know, who are you, where you came from? You know, you've been at this, I think, since around 1984, which, you know, not to brag, but that's 1 year before I was born. So, yeah.
Yep. Yeah. So, you know, as you said, I've been an investment sales broker in New York City for 42 years. When I was in school, I wanted to be an investment banker like you guys. You know, I wanted to be the next Gordon Gekko like every other kid at Wharton back in the early 80s. But I ended up getting a summer job at Coldwell Banker that summer between freshman and sophomore year. When I applied for the job, I thought it was a bank. But they were the only ones hiring college kids for the summer. I took the job, went back my next 2 summers, and then started with CB in Manhattan when I got out of school. So spent 4 years at CBRE, which was then called Coldwell Banker, then Coldwell Banker Commercial, et cetera. And then started my own firm with my partner, Paul Massey, back in 1988. We owned and ran that company for 26 years and 46 days. Before we sold it to Cushman & Wakefield in 2014. We had a very unique approach to the business. We believe very significantly in specialization. So we only sold buildings. We only represented sellers, only worked on exclusives, only worked in New York. And from 2001 to 2014, according to CoStar, the number 2 brokerage company in New York City had sold about 1,300 properties. We sold over 4,000. So we lapped the field by more than 3x, even though we were just a little popcorn stand of a company, you know, competing against regional, national, and global firms. And sold the company in 2014 to Cushman for $100 million. I then spent 3.5 years at Cushman as the chairman of investment sales in New York, and then 6 years at JLL as chairman of investment sales in New York, and then got fired by JLL in February of 2024. April of 2024, started a new venture again, so I'm back to my entrepreneurial roots. The new company is BKREA, and we're off to a great start. Last year, we did 43 deals for about $1.8 billion. We have about $4 billion of listings that we're working on now, and you know, having fun again, being an entrepreneur.
That's great. So I'll take the first stab at a question here. So, you know, you decided to jump back into it and start a new company. I'm sure, you know, there were plenty of other opportunities, partnerships, places you could have gone with a big, you know, sentence long title or something like that with a big shop. So what led you to go like back into the trenches, so to speak?
Well, I actually never left the trenches. One of the great things after the sale of the of Massey Knakal, you know, it was a time of a lot of introspection, figuring out what I wanted to do when I grew up. And I looked at a number of different things, but it occurred to me that I absolutely love selling buildings. I love being a broker. And, it's not only a career for me, it's also my hobby. And so I continued to sell buildings at Cushman and at JLL. And when I was asked to leave JLL, again, I tried to figure out what I was going to do, what the path was. I've always been very, very entrepreneurial. And given the track record that I was able to develop, there really wasn't a platform that could do anything for me. And so I decided to, hang the shingle out again, teach a whole new crop of folks the business. One of the things, we in the Massey Knakal days, we more than 3x'd all the much larger and better funded competitors. I'm proud of that. We sold it for a lot of money. I'm proud of that. But the thing I'm most proud of is that today, in the commercial real estate investment sales sector in New York City, there are 35 companies or divisions of companies that are owned by or run by people that we taught the business to. That's something that is very personally rewarding for me. I continue to do my sales. And last week, I did a $236 million deal for Vornado. That was my 2,406th transaction, about 94 million square feet of buildings, and about $24.4 billion in total sales volume. And I want to keep that going, but I really get a lot of personal reward and satisfaction out of seeing young folks grow and learn. And I have an online mentoring program I'm doing now, and just get a great feeling from helping people build better businesses and build better lives.
Bob, you're I'm gonna use a basketball analogy, but you're like the Coach K with your legacy, your tree. You started a company, and then you had all these people that trained and you worked with for many, many years, and now they've branched off, right? And that's I guess for all of us in the business, if you could build a legacy and help other people and just be a good guy, because there's a lot of tough people in our business. It says a lot about what you've done. It's pretty exciting, and I would say kudos to you for that.
Thanks. Yeah, it's great, and I love seeing those folks do well. And I always say, as long as they're not competing directly with me, I wish them all the luck in the world.
I do have a question for you. I haven't started to get into it, but look, every block, every neighborhood in New York City at this point, and you've transacted on everyone. I'm sure people and some of your other clients have come to you over the years, and as we make money in our business, you make money in your business, you reinvest the money into deals. Why not start a fund? Some brokers, their goal is to you start as a broker, and then you want to get to the principal side and create something and become Vornado, right? I'm sure there was a lot of people when you were trying to figure out your next step of what you wanted to do that maybe offered $500, $1 billion to go set up a fund and go run and do that. Why not do that? And at that point in time.
Yeah, well, Justin, you know what? Because it's a completely separate business that I don't know anything about. I love simplicity. My life is wonderfully simple. I have a wife and a 17-year-old daughter that I love more than anything in the world. They're my priorities. I try to spend as much time as possible with them. I go to the gym, I go to church, and I sell buildings. That's it. That's my life. And, in the Massey Knakal days, never got on the principal side of the business because every waking moment we were trying to figure out how to make the company valuable. After the sale of the company, when I had a couple of bucks, it occurred to me, I don't know the first thing about about buying buildings. I think that I never wanted to have to answer the question. If my clients knew that I bought buildings also, and I was also brokering, which I would never give up, I never wanted to offer someone a deal and have them say to me, well, hey, Bob, if this is such a great deal, why didn't you buy it? So I think there are inherent conflicts of interest. And I'm just telling you what works for me. A lot of brokers
Yeah.
have very successfully gone onto the principal side. They own properties. There's some guys in town, when they offer you a deal, you don't know whether they're the broker, the silent partner, the LP, they're flipping it, they own
Yeah.
it. I like to keep things very, very simple and straightforward. I don't want to ever have to remember what I say to anybody. So, keeping it simple has worked for me. And I also think that, owning real estate is not an easy thing. It's not always cracked up to be. Everybody's, oh, buy real estate, you'll make millions. Well, I have dozens and dozens of clients that have spent 30, 40, 50 years buying multifamily assets in New York that had 9-figure net worths 10 years ago that are broke today because of these stupid rent laws in New York City. So it's not, there's no guarantees that you're going to make money if you own real estate. But I think it's a full-time job, and my full-time job is representing people who want to sell and trying to get the best possible deal for them. So again, in the vein of keeping things simple and avoiding conflicts of interest, and not remembering what you said to anybody and being able to sleep at night, I think brokering is a very comfortable old shoe that is not doesn't create any of those negative things.
Understood.
Let's talk a little bit about the discipline of being a broker. It's not an easy business. You just kind of made it sound real easy, but it is hard, and you have to create some rules to live by. And everyone's got their own ways to think about it, but obviously there's some particular rules that people become great intermediaries, advisors, brokers live by, and may differ a little bit by personality, by the specialty, by location, jurisdiction, whatever it is. But for you, I know you're kind of famous for some rules. So why don't we dive into that a little bit? Let's hear, what rules do you live by? And if someone's new, what rules would you recommend they have or not?
Sure. Well, Evan, that's a great question. And I love that you brought up discipline, because I always say if you look at the DNA of very elite salespeople, I believe they all possess 3 characteristics very, very obviously in their makeup. And so for young people, I say, look at people who are really, really successful and see if you see these 3 characteristics in them. 1, passion. They love it. You have to love it because, it's funny at Massey Knakal, we always just joke around that to be successful in commercial real estate, you only have to work half a day. Doesn't matter what 12 hours a day you work, but you got to work 12 hours a day. And if you don't really love what you're doing, it's hard to put in that kind of time. And
That's right.
passion can take 2 forms. You either have passion for the mechanical aspect of doing your job day in and day out, or you have passion for what success brings you. And success brings you a lot of great things. It brings you recognition, independence, security, financial reward. So you have to have passion for one of those 2 aspects, hopefully both of those. Second characteristic is expertise. I firmly believe that, the more specialized you are, the better, because the more specialized you are, the more you're able to differentiate yourself from everybody else who wants to do what you're doing. And the more you can create that differentiation, the more of a competitive advantage you have. And I use as an example, let's say you're out for a run and you tear the ACL in your knee, and you go see 2 doctors. And the first doctor says, oh, knee ACL, no problem. Done a bunch of those. I do knees, ankles, hips, elbows, wrists. I got you covered. Next guy you go see, yeah, knee ACL, no problem. I only do knee surgery. I've done over 14,000 of them. It's all I do is knees. Who are you having your surgery with? So I think the extent to which you can really be an expert at something, and something that's small enough that you can really get your fingernails into every aspect of it, but large enough you can make a good living in that niche, that's the way to develop the expertise. And then getting to the third characteristic, which, as you said, is the ability to use discipline well. And notice that I say use discipline as opposed to have discipline, because every human being has access to the same exact amount of discipline, but we all choose to use it differently. And I love the quote from Abe Lincoln, who said that discipline is choosing between what you want now and what you want most. And you have to have that discipline to keep you going. You know, a lot of what we do in brokerage as an intermediary, a lot of what you're doing is not very exciting. You know, you have to do a lot of nuts and bolts, blocking and tackling kind of stuff. You have to, you know, make your calls and create your content and do your research and do these things over and over and over again. And so around the office, you know, we always say you have to pound the rock. And I love it when folks come into the office in the morning and say, hey, BK, I'm going to pound the rock today. What's pounding the rock? Pounding the rock is the Stonecutter's creed. So as an illustration, Stonecutter comes into the shop in the morning, sits in front of a big block of stone and peels out the mount and whacks the thing. 1, 2, 3, 5, 50, 75, 99, nothing's happened. 100th blow, the rock splits in half. And to the casual observer at the back of the room, they say, oh, that 100th one was different. The stonecutter must have used a different mallet or struck the stone at a different angle or hit it harder. But the stonecutter knows that that 100th blow is no different than the 99 that came before it. It's the 99 that came before it that allowed that 100th one to work. And provided you're doing fundamentally the right things and you keep doing them over and over and over again, eventually it will work. Unfortunately, most people stop after 20, stop after 50, stop after 70. They don't keep going. And so I think that's where the discipline comes in, is that you have to know to keep pounding the rock and eventually it'll work for you. But, you know, sometimes you don't see, just like the stonecutter doesn't see the crack forming inside the rock. You have to believe that what you're doing is accretive towards getting to your objective. And so I just... you know, I still make prospecting calls every day. You know, that's the gasoline that drives the car in my business. And you just have to look at those three things. You have to love the business. You have to develop an expertise that will differentiate you from others. And then thirdly, you have to use discipline well to keep going when you feel like you might want to stop.
Interesting. I want to press you a little bit further though. Like, let's roll back, 30 years or whatever, or maybe tell us, you certainly have folks in your firm who are less experienced than you. What are some of the specific things that you tell them? Is it like, hey, you got to do so many calls every day, or hey, take so many swings, or make sure you get an exclusive, or like, what are some of the guiding principles?
Hey, look, it's very simple. You alluded to this earlier. The real estate brokerage, and I think all sales for the most part, it's a very simple business. It's just very, very hard. But what I tell people who are getting started, one, pick a target. I'll use as an example. Let's say that the three of us were going to go to Iceland and start a rock brokerage business. What would we do? We'd go up to, I've never been to Iceland, but we'd go to Iceland. We'd make up a list of everybody that owns rocks. We'd make up a list of everybody that buys rocks. Then we'd study the rock market, figure out how many of each type of rock there are, how valuable each type of rock is. And then we'd go get the people who own the rocks, try to hire us to sell the rocks for them. And if they hired us to sell the rocks, we'd call the people that buy rocks. That's brokerage, right? So what do I tell the young people in the industry? Define your market. What are you going to do? Know the market well. I'm very active on social media. I get so many DMs and emails from folks saying, "Hey, BK, I'm 2 years in. I'm 3 years in. I'm competing with people with 20 years of experience. How am I possibly going to compete with them?" And I remember a conversation I had with one kid. He's from Kansas City. And I said, well, all right, what do you do? He said, well, I sell apartment buildings in Kansas City. I said, okay, how many buildings are in your market? It's like, I don't know.
He says, I don't know.
I said, okay, how many sold last year? I don't know. What was the average price per square foot? I don't know. I said, all right, when you get off this call, go buy a map of Kansas City, draw a line around it, go out, count every building, every apartment building, and study how many sold last year, how many the year before that, how many the year before that. What was the average price per square foot? What was the average price per unit? What was the average cap rate? Who owns the most buildings? Who owns the most units? Who sold the most buildings in the last 3 years? Who bought the most buildings in the last 3 years? And I said, you study the market, become an expert. And the next time you go meet with an owner, you throw these statistics around. I guarantee you that the broker with 20 years of experience or 30 years of experience doesn't know those numbers. So that's how you compete with them. So I say, study your market, become an expert, and then constantly have valuable things that you can, when you're making your prospecting calls, valuable things you can share with the owner of the property. These are major assets for these people. If you're telling them something that's going to impact the value of their property, they're probably going to want to listen to you. But you have to have something of value. If you just call them up and say, hey, do you want to sell your building? They're going to hang up on you. So it's creating expertise, understanding what's required, make up a to-do list. I also a big preacher of during the week you're working in your business, on the weekend work on your business. What are the strategies and tactics you're going to implement? Where do you want to be in 3 years? Where do you want to be in 5 years? What new major initiatives do you want to do? But you have to be working on your business on the weekends, so that during the week, it's almost impossible for people who have been in business for a while to carve out 3 or 4 hour chunks of time during the week with the busy calendars you have. But you do that kind of stuff on the weekend, and you pre-block time on your calendar 3-4 weeks in advance, so that you have time to make prospecting calls and do the things you need to do. So, a number of things like that. And this is all, I have an online mentoring program called the Knakal Dealmakers Network. And every month we do 2 1-hour sessions where we talk about best practices, becoming the expert, a deep dive on what we call the Knakal Nuggets, which are lessons learned over the years, mainly by getting my head kicked in so much. But I'm happy to always share those things with people, because I think, one of the things that gets you up the learning curve quickly is learning from people who have been there and done that. And, one of my biggest regrets is that when Paul and I started out, we did everything by trial and error, and consequently made hundreds, if not thousands, of mistakes. Fortunately, we didn't make a lot of those mistakes twice, but made a lot of mistakes. And if folks, can get something from me and avoid making some of those mistakes, then that's a benefit.
I guess, Bob, one of the things that Massey Knakal is, at least when I was coming up through the ranks, that you guys are really known for, you had team members that covered certain neighborhoods, right? And they stayed in those neighborhoods. They got to know who, it was my understanding, each and every owner of every property on XYZ street was, and you just constantly stayed in front of them. Can you just talk about
Yeah, it's the
that
same.
mentality?
In some ways we've kept true to the old formula. In some ways we've inverted it. And I'll tell you, back in the 80s and 90s, that geographic specialization worked beautifully, because publicly available information was not that voluminous. What was available was pretty inaccurate. And so we literally put someone in every neighborhood. The neighborhoods were together like a jigsaw puzzle. And you started at the southwest corner of a block and went north and east and south and west. And you talked to every owner on that block, and then went to the next block. And yeah, you knew everything. You were a real market expert. Today, because of the quantity and accuracy of publicly available information, I don't think that geographic specialization works as well. And also, although we had a very narrow value proposition, the value proposition was we only sold buildings, only worked for sellers, only worked on exclusives, only worked in New York. The first leg of those 4, we were generalists. We sold all kinds of buildings. Today, in the new iteration of my firm, because the world is different, we're more product specialists. We only sell vacant or to be vacant buildings in New York. What do you do with vacant buildings in New York? Knock them down and build something new, renovate them and change the use from one use to another, or sell them to a user that's going to occupy the building for their own purposes. And so what we've done is we've taken an approach where back in the Massey Knakal days, we were going a mile wide and an inch deep. And, before email became popular, we were sending out 3 million pieces of hard mail a year. So we were carpet bombing the whole market. Today, we've inverted that approach, where we're going an inch wide and a mile deep. We're very, very sophisticated with respect to understanding every legislative program, every tax abatement, every zoning bonus, ways to increase density of development sites or get tax abatement on conversion properties. We have an in-house, first of its kind policy and zoning SWAT team, so we can, within 24 hours, completely dice and slice an opportunity and understand exactly how to maximize the value. But we're only working on those vacant buildings. So we've narrowed the market very, very significantly, but we've gone extraordinarily deep with regard to the level of expertise that we have in that niche. And again, that follows the whole mantra of really being the specialist, be the go-to person, be the one who knows the most about the subject matter when you're in a conference room with a bunch of people.
You're truly advising the client, not to, yeah. You've learned, yes, we want to make money and get a deal done, but if you're adding value and you're educating the client, your ads, they'll come back to you for every single deal, right?
Yeah, I mean, no disrespect to any clients or any owners, but the fact is that the legislative landscape has changed so much in New York City. We have now the City of Yes. We've had a number of rezonings that have taken place. We have a new affordable housing program called UAP. We have different tax abatement programs. The 421A is now 485X. We have a 467M tax abatement program to convert non-residential buildings to residential. We have different rules and regulations about how you can transfer air rights from landmark properties, how you can increase density on sites. And it's really tough to keep up. Most property owners are busy day to day trying to figure out how to make their existing buildings run as well as possible and be as profitable as possible. They don't have time to understand every nook and cranny of these new policies that come out. So we spend time figuring out all of those policies, how to maximize the value. I just was on a pitch with a client this morning. They have a site that's about 180,000 buildable square feet. Well, with all the different air rights, bonus programs, MTA bonus, a number of things that are available, we can get the density of that site up to about 500,000 feet.
Wow.
So, that I think is adding real value. It's a real benefit to the client, and clients are loving it. And, I really
So
am.
that's the knee surgeon, right? I mean, you're a mile deep in that. Can I just switch gears just a tiny bit here? You're mentioning the alphabet soup of New York City, programs and state programs, federal programs and stuff. But right now we're also seeing like a pretty dramatic shift in the New York City policy environment. Some big shifts in tax policy. The pied-à-terre, I can't say that. I give my best stab. Debate, and there's a political reality that's kind of set in New York City, and I think it's probably, it's certainly an interesting paradigm shift. The epicenter of capitalism has been New York City, and hopefully we'll see what the outcome of all this is shortly. But do you have any thoughts there on all these new moving pieces?
Yeah, well, I think the mayor and the administration is definitely having an impact on the market, in some ways negative, in some ways positive. And for what I do of selling development sites and redevelopment opportunities, their policies have been very, very positive. Our rent regulated housing stock is taking a beating. Properties are trading for 75% below where they were at the peak, and those numbers probably going to go down even more, based on
Wow.
the campaign pledge to freeze rents. And so that sector of the market's a disaster. But
Right.
new development is doing relatively well. We've had a lot of legislation that has made development more appealing. The pied-à-terre tax that you mentioned, Evan, is a terrible tax that's not likely to produce nearly the revenue that was anticipated. Sometimes policy works backwards. I remember back in the 90s, we had a 10% state capital gains tax on any real estate deal over $1 million. And we actually collected less tax revenue after that tax was implemented than during it.
They've learned that in LA recently, with
Yeah,
their
so
transfers.
they
It's like,
got rid of it, but transaction volume just stopped. So all the other ancillary taxes, charges, and fees that the city collected went away, and they ended up getting rid of it. I think this is very likely to be something like that. So
right.
if you want to promote development, don't make the execution of development more difficult. The more expensive you make something, the less of it you get. So, I think our policymakers need to use common sense, and I know sometimes that that doesn't always go together, but they have to continue to try to encourage development, because that really is the solution to our housing
Supply
crisis.
and demand, right? More supply, means maybe lower prices for people. So it's Charlie Munger is famous for his quote, right? It's just something like, "Show me the incentive, and I'll show you the outcome." So
Mhm.
sometimes I think what you're saying is policymakers like to focus on things that sound great, but the incentive structures may produce radically different outcomes than what was proposed or what they thought they could do.
Right.
Justin, any thoughts there, or should we want to?
Yeah, well, let's keep moving. I think we covered that without
Yeah.
upsetting anybody in the political arena. So,
Right. Let's talk about unoccupied versus occupied properties a little bit in New York City and kind of what's going on there, given, there's a bit of a user premium maybe in New York City today. And what does that mean? Like,
It's
unpack that.
interesting. New York is the only place in the country where vacant properties are worth more than occupied properties. Any place around the U.S., you want the building to be leased, producing income, has more value. In New York, it's the opposite. And in fact, going back to 1984, there have been 1,014 vacant buildings bought by user groups that are going to occupy them. On average, those user groups have paid 17% more than investors are willing to pay. So there's a 17% user premium. And it's a very real dynamic in New York City.
Interesting. Counterintuitive.
Well, if you think about it from the user's perspective, they don't have to worry about what's going to happen when their lease expires. They get appreciation. They get to put a press plaque on the front door. They get to put a picture on the cover of their corporate brochure. There are a number of things that make owning your building very, very attractive.
Interesting. Let's talk a little bit about data. You've been famous for your map room, and now obviously you've got probably a lot of proprietary data in your data moat, I guess you could call it, internally within your company from 40 years of working deals in New York City, and I don't know, 30,000 or whatever, a gigantic number of transactions that you guys have done. Today, there's this constant conversation about proprietary data, data that's maybe not in the model, that everyone's training on, et cetera, and a data moat. And obviously, I think the human brain is incredible, runs on like 10 watts of power and can, we can have these sophisticated conversations, et cetera. But AI, is an amazing tool. So how are you guys thinking about that in the context of, a traditional business of, elbow grease, hard work, knocking on doors, et cetera?
I think that data has to be proprietary to be valuable. If you're using a data set that's available to everybody, you're going to go into a client and talk about a multi-million-dollar transaction with a data set that's available to a fifth grader. That makes no sense. And if the data is available to everybody, then the data is not a differentiator. because everybody has data. This is the same data. So I think you have to have your own data. And yes, AI, extraordinarily powerful. But the difficulty, we use AI in two ways. We use it for funneling. So, in prospecting and in deal execution, it's perfect because you're going from thousands of people to hundreds to dozens to a few. AI is great for that. The most powerful application of AI is in data interpretation because AI can do millions of calculations a second. The problem for real estate is that most data sets in our industry suck. And absolute numbers don't really mean much. If I tell you guys that in 2019 there was $23.6 billion of sales volume in Manhattan, you may not know what to think about that. If I tell you that at the peak of the market in 2015, it was 57.4 billion, and during COVID in 2020 it fell to 11.1 billion, the 26.3 starts to have some feel. So it's not the absolute numbers that matter. It's where the numbers are going. Are the numbers going up or are they going down? How much are they going up? How much are they going down? So it's the relational movements within the data set that matter. And those movements only have integrity if the data has been calculated the same way all the time. I mean, at Oldco, I was there for 6 years. We had 3 different heads of New York research. One tracked every sale over 10 million, one tracked every sale over 500,000, and the third one tracked every sale over 5 million. That's like me trying to figure out, what baseball team hits the most home runs. If I count the Yankee home runs on Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays, I count the Orioles on odd days of the week. The data is meaningless. It's ridiculous. So, one of the things we've have data sets where we've used the same exact methodology for 42 years. So our data sets are incredible. We've created what we call the Knakal Land Index, which is a study of all 2,489 land sales that have occurred in Manhattan, south of 96th Street, going back to 1984. We disaggregate that data into rental land, condo land, hotel, office, and a miscellaneous bucket. We've created our own proprietary AI models to look at the fluctuations in values and compare them to a host of macroeconomic factors like interest rates, lending rates, inflation, S&P 500, Dow Jones, price of gold, price of oil, price of gasoline, consumer sentiment, 33 different macroeconomic things. And so we've isolated what factor or basket of factors are very insightful relative to future movements in the market. We've also come up with a number of different insights. Like if you have a development site on the corner versus a development site in the middle of the block, you'll get a 16.6% premium in pricing historically. And we have 99 other insights that have come out of our data sets using AI. And that's the power of having proprietary data. So that I'm a big believer in that if you're using third-party aggregator data, the data is, first of all, probably not very accurate. And why would you use something that's available to every single person on earth?
Right.
Yeah, I can say, and Evan's been at the forefront, for on the Axis group of companies on, implementing, first off, having our own proprietary CRM platform, tracking everything from equity and debt sources, all term sheets that come in. It's pretty phenomenal. But and I've been at the large global type firms like you have in the past, and they're tracking, but it's not as good when you're, I guess, a little more nimble, and there's not 17 layers of bureaucracy to make decisions fast, right? I know, Evan, I don't know if you want to opine on
No, I
some
mean,
stuff.
I just echo what Bob said. I mean, I think I have a very similar philosophy. The one thing that's interesting about real estate data, in my opinion, is that it's all retrospective, right? It's all things that have happened in the past. And so, like, how can you better understand what's happening now so, and that might influence the future. And it sounds like you have a similar approach. I think what you mentioned is very interesting. Using AI over your data set that you have internally, trying to understand like what are the macro factors, et cetera, that move the needle for folks on development sites. Obviously, that's a huge question because you're talking about development sites in real estate are very difficult to understand because there's this huge lag time between when someone buys a site and when they deliver a unit and lease it to somebody. And understanding like what created the mindset, where someone believed that all the macro factors were going to move in the direction that they needed to move in order for them to, deliver the thing on budget, and into an environment where there's a supply lack so they could lease it at the right price, et cetera. Cap rates were in their favor, et cetera. So there's so much that goes into that, and it's very interesting to hear, how you think about it. But I think we have a similar thought process here.
And I think it's all, as long as you're
yeah,
using the same methodology, that's the important thing, right? There's so many different things. If you're figuring out cap rates, are you using the seller's cap rate or the buyer's cap rate? Those are often different. The buyer has more acquisition costs and upfront costs that go into the calculation of what the cap rate is. So if one day you're using the seller's cap rate, the next day you're using the buyer's cap rate, that's inconsistent. You lose integrity. And in development sites, so much of it, were the bonus programs in effect? Were the air rights already purchased? Were they not purchased? Did you have to buy tenants out? Did you have to pay for easements or rights of way? Did you have to do any of these things? A lot of that stuff is not public record. So, the value of the proprietary data becomes so important. And like New York is everything gets recorded. A lot of it is public data. But like I know my colleagues that I speak to in Texas, that's a non-reporting state, or I forget what you call it. But you can't.
Non-disclosure, usually.
Yeah, non-disclosure. You have to really get that information. But that's where that proprietary data is even more valuable because you really have something other people can't get, and that's what we're all looking for. We're all looking for data that no one else has, and so. I think that it becomes so valuable when you're able to procure a data set that is truly unique to your firm. That really becomes something that people will keep calling you for again and again.
It creates enterprise value as well, right? Evan, I know you have a couple of more topics and questions that you want to run through.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I think shifting gears here a little bit as we kind of wrap things up, Bob. You're known for your philosophies and things that have created like a local dominance for your firm. You've given us on this call some of the things that you would recommend to junior brokers getting into the business, et cetera. Let's talk a little bit about your legacy in the business. You've been doing this 42 years, I think you said at the beginning. And 42 years is a long time, but you're still cranking. How do you want to be remembered, and how do you want your firm to be known 20, 30 years from now?
Yeah, well, I'm hoping, I'm 64. I'm hoping 20, 30 years from now, I'm still selling buildings. If
I love that.
God gives me good health and I keep my marbles, I'd love to still be selling buildings. But absolutely, like I said, my proudest legacy are the 35 companies that are run by folks that I taught the business to. I'd love that number to grow. I have a lot of great folks that are working at my company now that I really enjoy teaching the business to. And through social media, sharing best practices, my mentoring program. I wrote a book last year. I'm in the process of signing a book deal with a major publisher to do another book. To the extent that, in the future, 20, 30 years from now, somebody can say, hey, yeah, I've been very successful in my life, and that guy Knakal helped me a little bit, that'll make me feel really great.
So the Knakal diaspora is what you're working
What is
on.
that?
The Knakal diaspora. You gotta, come up. I remember during COVID, I think when you had your transition from JLL to your new line of work here. Obviously you're a pretty famous guy in our little section of the universe, right? And so I really appreciate it. I'm trying to remember. You had I was trying to find it here really quick, but I couldn't. I didn't want to get distracted. But you had a post that you put online. I think you were like going outside with your tie on into the hot tub or something like this. I was trying to remember so I can make a joke about it.
You gotta have a little fun in life. I was at Don Tepman, who is the strip mall guy on social media, is a good buddy of mine, and we went to I had an extra ticket for a game. I was going with Don, and so we posted something on social media. Hey, the one who responds with the most compelling reason why you should come to the game with us, we'll send you the ticket. And so we had all kinds of responses and everything. And we went to the game with this kid who flew up from Texas to go to the game with us. And we took some pictures, and there's a picture of me with my suit and tie on, and a bunch of people were giving me shit. Hey, Knakal, you go to a hockey game with a suit and tie? And so I made kind of a joke about it, saying, I was very serious at the beginning. I said, well, my good friend Don Tepman told me that there'd be a downside to social media, and yes, it's happened. Everybody's telling me I do everything with a suit and tie on, and I'm going to prove to you that I don't do everything with a suit and tie on. So I went through a number of things. I was, shooting pool, working out in my gym, shooting a hockey puck, shooting basketball, playing tennis, all with the suit and tie on. And then I said, and just to prove to you I don't do everything with a suit and tie on, I took my tie off, but I left my suit jacket on, and in my suit I got into the hot tub.
That's right.
Had to have a little fun with it now and then.
Oh, that's hilarious. That's really funny. Justin, anything else you got here?
No, I mean, this is great. I was actually taking notes as you were speaking because I just turned 45, and I've been in business for 22, 23 years since I got out of school. And but as you kind of mentioned, like, I eat, sleep, breathe. This is not a job. This is my career, right? And it's 24-hour, 7-day a week. But you always need to be learning something. So I was taking some notes. So I appreciate you giving me some knowledge as well.
You got
Yeah.
it.
So, yeah, Bob, you've got a book, you said, you've got, your Instagram, LinkedIn, you're out there doing podcasts. Where do people find out more about you?
Yeah, well, I'm on all the major social media platforms. You can follow me there or email me at bk@bkrea.com or call me on my cell, 917-509-9501. Happy to talk to you. And, I'm always out and about. I speak in public. I go to a lot of networking events. My goal is always 261 networking events a year because there are 261 working days. So you'll, if you're in New York, you'll probably see me around. I'm also traveling around the country quite a bit to speak at events. So hope to catch up with you if you'd like to chat.
Great.
That's great.
All right. Well, thank you, Bob. And thank you to our listeners. For our listeners, don't forget to go to gspartners.com and sign up for FinFacts, weekly newsletter that with a ton of information about recent deals we've done, which include a bunch of deal details, rates, etc. Don't forget to sign up there, and of course subscribe to the pod. And Bob, thank you for coming on.
Evan, Justin, thank you so much for having me on.
Have a great weekend.
Take care.